Hi everyone, this is Soda,
And I'm KLMeri.
and welcome once again to the Space Trio podcast. Today we are going to talk about the original series movies, all six of them. I want just to say before we start that I think what a lot of us may not realize, but we kind of have to acknowledge, is that there are two main reasons that there are any movies for the original series at all. And the first one is, of course, the fans that kept on going all throughout, the 70s, keeping the fandom alive, keeping the interest alive. And the second reason is Star Wars, because if Star Wars hadn't been such a massive success, Paramount wouldn't have scrambled to look for its very own sci-fi franchise to make a movie about, and we wouldn't have the first movie basically.
Yeah, so Star Wars came out in 77, correct?
76, I think. 77.
Like you said, Star Wars had a big impact on audiences going to the big screen movie theaters. And then I think it was also, so there was a couple of big sci fi hits in the theaters at the time.
Yeah.
And to your point, that Paramount had not put a big sci-fi production on the screen outside of, I think, Close Encounters.
Yeah. So I just want to say these are the two reasons I think that brought us to the first subject of our video of our podcast today. The original, the motion picture, basically. All right. So the motion picture. Uh, to make a very long story short, the motion picture is set about how many years after the original series supposedly ended?
Well, it aired in 1979, so
No, how many years after the events of the original series ended?
that's what I'm doing the
10 years
math
in
in
the
my
future?
head.
No,
So like 9 years,
something like that. Yeah.
10
Um,
to 9 to 10 years, somewhere in there. Because I think the series ended in '69.
I mean, like how many years after the Enterprise finished its 5-year mission?
Oh, you mean canonically?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I was thinking that, it's been 10 years since Star Trek the original series has been off the air.
Yeah,
You have some,
yeah.
big picture sci-fi Star Wars going into theaters. Paramount's like, we've got the rights to Star Trek. We're going to get into the game. And so they decide to make a movie. And it's been 10 years since the cast of the original series has been any new content. But canonically, 3 years?
3 years? Yeah, really?
I can't remember. The point is that Kirk is no longer captain of the Enterprise.
Yeah. Kirk is no longer the captain of the Enterprise. He's no longer a captain. He's an admiral now. McCoy is not even in Starfleet, and neither is Spock. And basically, the series starts with the Federation facing a very strange new phenomenon that's threatening life in the Federation. Some kind of entity, very big, very vague entity that just seems to trample everything in its way. And it's coming to Earth. And, well, Kirk sees it as an opportunity to get back on the captain's chair. And to do that, he calls back to his side Jones, and Spock comes along too, eventually.
Although I don't think he calls Spock, does he?
No, he doesn't call Spock, but that's why he added, and he comes to eventually.
Right. This whole weird scene where Spock is ready to do the Kolinar ritual, and um, the Vulcan master tells him he hasn't achieved it and he has to look elsewhere, and because she senses some something in his consciousness calling to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, what we find is, like you said, Kirk is an admiral. Bones is, I don't know, a roller disco champion. By the looks of it.
Yeah.
And
Full on beard.
Yeah.
He's clearly enjoying his retirement, and he is in fact very upset when Kirk calls him out of retirement.
Yeah, exactly.
Against his will.
And Spock, yeah, and Spock is trying to purge all feelings on Vulcan, but he can't. And well, should I mention the novelization now?
I think there's one interesting point here, and that's Kirk finagles his way into command of the ship. I mean, I think the ship has Decker as its captain, and then Decker almost gets demoted or something, so that Kirk can captain the ship. It's almost like he strong arms his way into that.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Like, it's very unfair to Decker. But well, it's pretty obvious that Kirk isn't happy with Admiral life, and well, by the way the movie makes it look, Spock can't complete his emotion purging, the KLMeri ritual, because he is somehow connected telepathically, emotionally, or whatever to this phenomenon that we call Voyager. But in the novelization, it's because he's connected to Kirk.
Yeah.
Basically.
And we're going to talk more about the novelization a little later on.
But really, it's kind of a pretty big departure from the show, the motion picture. First of all, we get a new Enterprise. The Enterprise goes for some renovation. But then we get, new uniforms. Everybody's obviously a little older. And the tone is a little darker than most episodes.
So, shall we, let's talk about the villain of the movie.
Voyager. There's kind of not a lot to say. It's, there is some sub-story about, like, Commander Decker and Lieutenant Ilyana and Voyager, who's, well, spoilers, obviously, but Voyager turns out to be a very old, basically kind of probe that Earth sent centuries ago, and he got somehow all the way to the other side of the galaxy, where he encountered alien beings who are more machine than men, basically, and they taught him to basically think for himself.
And he comes back looking for his maker.
Basically, yeah, he came back looking for his maker because he completed his job. He meant to analyze and collect information. And by collecting this information...
And it turns out this is very reminiscent of a season 2 episode.
Yeah, kind of. It's also very reminiscent of later villains of the Star Trek franchise.
If you think about just the AI, looking for its maker, being self-aware, it's very much like the Changeling.
Yeah, it is.
There's even a part where Voyager is, he's not a friendly entity, right?
Yeah.
He has certain opinions about humans.
Yeah. Who doesn't?
So there's this whole thread where basically Kirk has to do what he does to save the day, right? That's what it comes down to.
Well, I'll say this, the movie it's very heavily inspired by 2001 Space Odyssey. Like, it was also the only movie that was, created with the very heavy involvement of Gene Roddenberry, and he wasn't at all shy about the influences of 2001: Space Odyssey. He wanted the movie to be more of an experience than like a movie with plot characters, and it shows. It's a very weird movie.
It is a very strange movie, especially some of the moments where Spock is connected to this entity, correct?
Yeah,
You know, is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? Like,
yeah,
it's very philosophical.
yeah, and it's very slow too. Yeah, it's also very slow. Like a lot of like atmospheric shots, a lot of like focus on the visuals rather than anything else. Basically, very it's very different from anything that came before or after it in the franchise. Very different in this slowness, in this focus on the atmosphere and philosophical questions, more than plot or anything else. That it's very different than anything that came before or after it in the franchise.
I would definitely agree with that. Um, and I think if we can just real quick talk for a moment about the special effects.
Yeah, we can talk about the special effects.
So I think you know that SFX was like a up and coming special effects basically was an up and coming thing for the big screen. And
Yeah,
you had of course seen it in like Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Obviously, there's a lot of heavy work in that, and like 2001: A Space Odyssey. So that in part played into the very long scene of them approaching the Enterprise because they were using this new. Well, they were basically using computer graphics and these special effects to show the Enterprise or the new version of the Enterprise, and so they, I would say, invested more in that than probably audiences might have anticipated.
yeah, and I also know that because of those special effects, they went seriously over budget by making this movie. Yeah, and probably that's part of the reason why the shots linger so much about the visuals because they spend so much time and money on them. Like you might as well look at them for 15 minutes.
Um, I read something interesting that Shatner said, and this will just sort of lead us into the next movie. But he said whenever they finished a film with the original series cast, they always burned the set afterwards, and there was never any talk
Hmm.
about, oh yeah, like you're going to be coming back in a couple of years and doing another movie. It was like, oh well, good job, thanks again, we burned the set. And so uh, I think when they started making the Star Trek movies, they didn't realize they, at least for the original series, it would be six of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I actually heard that some of the sets were later reused. So I'm not so sure they actually burned all of them. Like the corridors, for example, the corridors that were used in the motion picture very specifically are the same corridors that you see in the Next Generation.
Yeah.
I guess they just kind of shipped them off to the TV studio. You go use them.
I find it interesting that I was a little shocked to hear that they even burned some of them, but apparently it was they weren't thinking long term, and they weren't in the beginning planning to invest long term in several movies. And the management would change over every 3 to 5 years, and they were just looking to make some immediate profit and just basically investing the bare minimum to get the movie out there, and then at the end of the day just taking it all down.
Yeah.
So I even read somewhere that especially with like the motion picture, they had such a minimal staff, they ended up having to take staff from other movies in production.
Really? Whoa.
And then they were like,
That's interesting.
it was basically like, we're investing in this movie. We think we're going to get a big profit from it, but we didn't have a big budget. Let's just go grab some of, let's just go take like a Space Odyssey or Close Encounters of the Third Kind, staff and say they have to go do Star Trek right now so we can get this movie out. And then what's interesting is at the end of the day, I think this is sort of a divisive movie. Simply because, as you said, it's not like any of the others. And some people, well, a lot of people make fun of it for certain reasons.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons.
But at the end of the day, it still got Academy Award nominations for Best Visual Effects and Best Art Direction and the Best Original Score.
And I think that if you're just if you adjust the dollar, the inflation rates, it's still to this day the most successful movie in the franchise. Yeah. Though I think maybe Into Darkness surpassed it, but I'm pretty sure it's still the most successful one.
Is that internationally or domestically?
I don't think they kind of made a difference back in the day. I mean, it was the 70s. Just the total gross.
I think it like 100 million, close to it, something like that.
Maybe, but but adjusted for inflation for the 1970s. Yeah.
Yeah.
But actually, what you said reminded me that there is a famous scene in the movie where Captain Kirk addresses a room full of officers and Starfleet personnel. It's like the crowd is actually composed of fans who wanted to be, extras in the movie.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I can imagine there was just so much hype for this first movie, since it had been 10 years, the original, and they probably never thought they would see Star Trek again.
Yeah, I mean, there was the animated series, but having all the live cast back again on the Enterprise was probably a huge deal.
Oh, yeah, and one other thing came to mind. The plot for this movie was originally the pilot for Star Trek Phase 2. Isn't that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So to people who don't know, who haven't heard the story, Gene Roddenberry originally had an idea for a continuation of the original series. I think it was supposed to also be a TV series.
Mm-hmm.
It was called Star Trek Phase 2. And if I remember correctly, none of the main characters of the original series was supposed to be in Phase 2.
The pilot, or the original plot, was you have a NASA probe returning to Earth that has melded with some superior alien intellect and becomes sentient.
Yeah.
And so instead of Star Trek Phase 2, we get the motion picture.
And then we get the second movie. So because it was so successful, the motion picture, it was successful basically for its day. It did go over budget, but it was successful enough to grant a second movie. The second movie came out in how many years afterwards? In 1981? 1982?
82.
82. Yeah, it came in 3 years later, 1982. Probably the most talked about movie in the franchise, the most well-known, The Wrath of Khan.
Let me just read you really quick one of the taglines for this movie. The Wrath of Khan, it was, "At the end of the universe lies the beginning of vengeance." And then another one was, "Beyond the darkness, beyond the human evolution, is Khan, a genetically superior tyrant, exiled to a barren planet, banished by a starship commander he is destined to destroy. Left for dead, Khan has survived."
That's kind of long for a tagline.
That is. That's on the. I think that's from the back of one of the. Like if you bought the VHS, that's what you would have read on the back about the movie.
So the story here is that, well, Kirk and Spock and McCoy are back in Starfleet again. They patch the differences. You know, they're friends again. Everything is cool and nice, and they're now teaching the academy, right? Or this Spock is teaching in the academy.
I think Spock is teaching, and he's teaching the Kobayashi Maru.
Yeah, he's teaching the academy, and
yeah.
Well, I guess Kirk is still bored with his role as admiral because he's always hanging around there, and
it's also his birthday.
As the tagline, also his birthday, yeah. And as the tagline say, Khan, the guy from Spaces, comes back determined to kill him. I haven't watched this movie in where Khan wants to steal the Genesis project, right?
He does, but it's also more about his personal vengeance against Kirk. So basically you have here's what I find is interesting is I can't remember how Chekhov and Captain is it Terrell? I think it is. Captain Terrell end up on SETI Alpha.
I think they were just in a ship, in a survey ship near it, and Khan kind of overtook them, and they crashed on this planet.
Right, and then obviously Chekhov recognizes SS Botany Bay, and then you know, long story short, Khan mind controls Chekhov and the captain with some slugs to their ears. It's very odd.
Yeah. But basically, by trying to steal the Genesis project, which is a project that's supposed to like help terraform planets, but it can also destroy the planets by terraforming them. We are introduced to Dr. Carol. What's
Marcus.
Name? Carol.
Marcus.
Carol Marcus. Yeah. Yeah, Marcus, and her son David, who are connected to Kirk in some way. David is Sam. Yeah, and yeah, basically it's kind of a cat and mouse chase between Khan and whoever of his crew that was left, and Kirk and his crew on the Enterprise.
Khan has stolen the Reliant, and
yeah,
he has taken everybody hostage, and he says, you know, hand me over the Genesis device. And basically Kirk outmaneuvers him, as he is wont to do.
Yeah.
And, you know, you might think that is all there is, but obviously Khan is so bent on revenge that even if all of his crew is dead, he basically finds a way to, during the space battle, to injure Kirk's ship, and then activates the Genesis device, knowing that it, you know, if the Enterprise can't get away, and you know he's the only one left on his ship, they're all going to die together. Ultimate revenge.
Yeah. Ultimate revenge. This movie is like it's very famous. It's also very quotable. You know, I think that's where the modern iteration of the, you know, revenge is a dish best served cold quote is from.
Well, I mean, think about it. Khan even quotes Moby Dick. I don't know if you've read that.
Yeah, he quotes.
It's a book about revenge.
Yeah, the movie was well thought out. I will say that it really was well thought out. Like, I just don't really like it personally, because I think it gets Kirk's character all wrong. You know, there are a lot of points about this movie. This movie is trying to make about Kirk, about how Kirk can't accept his old age and he can't accept defeat. And there is some truth to that, but also Kirk accepted a lot of defeat during the series, so it's not really fair to say he was like happy-go-lucky, always breaking the rules, always, and there is no-win scenario. There was a no-win scenario in many episodes, and Kirk accepted that. I think this movie is kind of partly responsible for the modern myth of Captain Kirk as like this, brash, rule-breaking swashbuckler who always gets the girl.
Yeah.
And it's not very accurate.
Yeah. I think what I find most fascinating about this movie is they talk about the test, the Kobayashi Maru that Kirk defeated. They talk about that several times in the movie. And always about what do you do in the no-win scenario. Obviously, that's sort of a lead up to being placed into the no-win scenario with Khan at the end. And if you were a fan of the original series, you might assume that if you had to make the ultimate sacrifice to beat the no-win scenario, probably many people assumed Kirk would be the one placed in that position if he couldn't defeat the no-win scenario. Because, like you said, he's been through that several times. Sometimes he's always come up with a way to do the impossible and to get out of it. And then there's been other times where he's not been defeated, but, had to accept the reality of the situation.
Yeah, that is exactly my point. That this movie is trying to make a point that Kirk never had to do that, but he did.
He did.
He did in the most famous. He did in the most famous episode of the show. I mean, in A City on the Edge of Forever, he had to let Edith Killer die to save the timeline, and he did because he had no other choice.
So at the end of the movie, I mean, spoiler alert, where Spock is the one to make the sacrifice, he's the one to go in to repair the warp core at the cost to his own life.
Yeah.
Kirk then has to face the reality of the no-win scenario. The rest of them live, but Spock does not. And what I find ironic about this is they then undo that in the next movie. So they make Kirk's face losing his best friend. And if this was real life, that's all she wrote. Right? That's it. You've had the funeral and you do what everybody else does. You grieve for the loss of your loved one and you move on. But no.
Yeah.
It should be the ultimate no-win scenario when it's death. And yet here we are in the next movie undoing this entirely.
Yeah, but I think it's kind of easy to look now at the movies and say, oh, but it's like we're in the next movie. But back when this was released, well, people didn't know there was going to be another movie. So from what I understand, the reaction to Spock dying was like severe.
Yes.
People were really losing their minds over it. They weren't willing to accept it. Spock just came back in the first movie, the motion picture, and now he's dead.
Yeah, you make a good point. They didn't necessarily think that there was going to be another movie with the original series cast. In fact, I think even Nimoy stated that, he didn't know. And, being the one, he thought, well, if this is the way my character ends, at least he ends with dignity.
Yeah.
So.
It also... Part of it was that, from what I understand, the filming of the motion picture wasn't a good experience for most actors. And that's why Nimoy came into the next movie on the condition that they kill his character because they didn't want to make any more movies. But then they enjoyed making the second movie so much they agreed to do more.
Before we move off of this one, can we talk really quick about Gene Roddenberry and how it was known that, well, let's just say, Gene Roddenberry was not happy with The Wrath of Khan when it was first proposed. In fact, he wrote a memo, calling the first script like a piece of garbage. Something to that effect. And a lot of people took that as he was just upset that he was not the one who was allowed to write it. But obviously, another screenplay was drafted and then became a script. And so it was all a moot point.
Yeah.
His rants were known to be legendary. To say the least, and so he really made no secret of the fact that that he was trying to initially derail the production, and then didn't he reveal Spock's death before production even started, or try to at least?
Might have.
Yeah.
I haven't heard about it, but I wouldn't be surprised. I kind of understand him because it's his move, it's his franchise. He came up with the ideas, the characters. He had a very clear vision of what he wanted the franchise to be like, and Wrath of Khan is a kind of a big departure from his vision because he didn't want a franchise about conflict. He wasn't really into action and fighting. He was more into like philosophical and cerebral debates and human rights, and the Wrath of Khan is about none of that. And so I kind of understand where he was coming from, but well, the audience has spoken, I guess.
Yeah. Is there anything else to mention here before we move on to the next one?
It's just that it's probably the most well-known and most popular Star Trek movie ever.
Yeah, that's true. Jokingly, because Kirk screams Khan's name, but also it's more known because Spock dies, I think.
Yeah, and also people really did like the antagonism between Khan and Kirk. They wanted to bring a villain from the original series back, and they had all kind of ideas on who to bring back until they landed on Khan.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to think who else they could bring back.
I thought the ending to the movie was very appropriate, given the fact that they didn't know they would be making another one.
Yeah.
Because I think the last thing that McCoy says is about Spock is he's not really dead as long as we find ways to remember him.
Yeah.
I think as a fan, that's sort of how I feel about the Star Trek series or Star Trek fandom in general. As long as fans continue to remember it, the fandom's not really dead. And in fact continues to keep reviving because there are so many of us here. So
exactly, one of the longest running franchises. So we move on to the next movie. The Wrath of Khan was kind of the beginning of a trilogy, and the following movie, Search for Spock, is the second part of that trilogy because it follows directly on the events of the Wrath of Khan. So here we have the Search for Spock, which is about the crew searching for Spock, basically. If anything, the scene that led to the Search for Spock, the one where Spock, before he dies, transfers his Katra to McCoy. So basically, it was added, I think, very last minute to the movie in kind of hopes that there might be another one.
Yeah. I guess maybe they felt we don't know how Paramount's going to feel in another like 2-3 years, if they'll be wanting to make another movie. But
Yeah.
it is very typical, if you don't leave an open ending, to at least plant the seeds for the continuation.
Yeah. And it was very subtle, movies today make like very big attempts at teasing a franchise, teasing a sequel. So this was really very subtle, because it could have meant anything to just have Spock kind of put his hand on McCoy's head and go like, remember. That's it.
So really, the way the movie starts is, like you said, picking up directly where you left off, and basically making it known fairly early on that something's up with McCoy.
Yeah.
And then Sarek comes to talk to Kirk about Spock. Well, one, he's upset with Kirk for having left Spock's body behind. Because now he's going to mention this something called the Katra, or the Vulcan soul equivalent, that has to be returned to the body. But how is Kirk supposed to know that? Because these are just things that Vulcans never talk about. So, and what I find interesting is that Sarek is obviously assuming that Spock gave his Katra to Kirk.
Yeah. Who else would he give it to?
Okay, so, but we might talk more about that later on.
Yeah. Well, so basically Sarek comes to Kirk while Kirk is still mourning, and he tells Kirk that, Vulcans have this thing called Katra, like he said, so that they have to bring to rest on Vulcan. And he also needs Spock's body for that. And as we see, McCoy is not doing that great. And as it turns out, it's McCoy who has Spock's Katra in his brain or whatever, and not Kirk. So the Enterprise crew steals the Enterprise in a very cool scene, and they all fly back to the Genesis planet, basically, to find Spock's body. And of course, there is a Klingon enemy waiting to kill them or whatever, once again.
Well, yes, as you know, the Klingons are very obsessed with fighting Kirk.
Yeah.
And so naturally, if they see the Enterprise off to do something, they're going to follow it and then challenge Kirk to a battle and just get in the middle at a really bad time. Such bad timing, Klingons.
Yeah. Klingons really do have bad timing.
And we once again see Carol Marcus and David Marcus as well. They're returning characters.
And also Saavik, which we didn't mention last movie,
right.
But Saavik is is a Vulcan. Well, in the novels, she's half Vulcan, half Romulan, but as far as we know in the movies, she's Vulcan. And she's basically Spock's apprentice.
Yeah, she's sort of like his protege. She had quite a... She was part of the Wrath of Khan. Just purely from like a learning from my mentor perspective.
Yeah.
And then she has a little more of a role in the search for Spock.
In the search for Spock, she and David Marcus, that is Carol Marcus's and Kirk's son, they go to study the Genesis planet, which is the planet that the Genesis project left behind, and on it they discover, Spock's body has been affected by the Genesis project thing, and it's been sort of regenerated. Spock was basically reborn. About his Katra.
Yeah, from something called like proto-matter.
Yeah.
Go figure. And in fact, the whole Genesis planet is rapidly aging.
Yeah, it's rapidly aging, destabilizing.
Yeah.
there is one very awkward scene between Saavik and teenager Spock. And well, but most of the time, I get the feeling that Saavik had more like maybe chemistry with David Marcus than Spock, you know.
Yes. And
And well,
then the Klingons show up.
then the Klingons show up, and Kirk and his friends show up, and there is a big battle, and Kirk saves Spock, and everybody's happy, and David Marcus dies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, and he loses the Enterprise.
And the Enterprise.
Yes.
Gone. Yeah.
Let's not forget,
Yep.
he has to sacrifice the Enterprise. He goes, "My God, Bones, what have I done?" As he watches it burn. And then, McCoy tells him something like, "What you always do, turn death into a fighting chance to live."
Yeah.
Which, to be honest, is sort of the thing that Spock would tell him, too.
Yeah. But, the Search for Spock, I think it's unique because unlike the first and second movie, the stakes are personal, basically. They're not like universe-killing villains. They're just like, they just want to save Spock.
That's exactly right, which is where the movie ends. They go back to Vulcan, to Mount Seleia, where they now have Spock's reborn body. And McCoy has the Katra, and they undergo, the procedure to basically refuse Spock's Katra back into his body. And you have that very moment at the end of the movie where, sort of everybody's waiting with bated breath to see if Spock is Spock. And
yeah.
And it ends by Spock turning to Jim and saying, or Kirk, and saying, "Jim, your name is Jim." And everybody's happy. It's Spock! He's back!
Yeah, it's a touching scene,
Yeah, it is.
Cute scene. And yeah, and there is this mythos around the movies, the Star Trek movies, like the odd-numbered one are bad and the even-numbered one are good. But I think the first movie it's not a bad movie. It's a cute movie. It's just it doesn't have as high stakes as other movies, but it's a cute movie.
Well, I think at that point you kind of recognize it as a middle movie. Because
you could.
It's not like you're playing up to this big end scene where, oh, we've rescued Spock and he's back and everybody's happy. It's sort of like, well, there was all this other plot going on, and it didn't have that feeling to it. Do you know what I mean? You almost knew that there was going to be another one.
Yeah. I think that when the third movie came out, the fourth one was kind of a sure thing.
Yeah. And it was done only 2 years later, so yes, they would have already had to start filming it.
Yeah. Well, so this leads us to the fourth movie. The one with the whales. It's kind of a weird way to end the trilogy, I admit. But it's a good way, as it turned out. Making kind of an environmental movie. Starting off exactly where the last movie ended once again. Spock and the Enterprise crew are still on Vulcan. Spock is kind of slowly coming back to himself. And then when they go try to get back to Earth to deal with the consequences of stealing the Enterprise and then destroying it and rescuing Spock, they come upon a sort of alien probe who apparently came thousands of years ago to Earth and communicated with the whales. But the whales went extinct in the 20th century. And without any whales, the probe starts trying to destroy Earth. So the Enterprise crew goes back in time to the 20th century to get some whales. And yes, that's the plot.
Yes, that is the plot. And the tagline for this movie is, The key to saving the future can only be found in the past.
Yeah.
And also,
Explain.
there's one more tagline. It says, they traveled back where 23rd century man had never gone before, to a mad, crazy, outrageous time, 1986. I could just picture that on the back of the VHS box.
Yeah.
So yes, the movie is made in 1986, and it is a time travel movie, where it's already a futuristic movie with time travel going back to the past. So naturally, you're going to go back to the same year, 1989. Very classic time travel. It's modern day, but not to the crew.
And and you get a lot of like shenanigans of future people coming to the 80s and seeing all of our primitive technology, and you know what? It's very funny. It's cute. It's probably the funniest. It's the funniest movie of the bunch, and it's just a lot of fun. That's what it is. It's just a lot of fun.
It is quite a lot of fun. They get to use the slingshot maneuver from the TV series.
Yeah.
Love the science behind that. Actually, I don't even know the science behind that. I don't think there is any. They get to park the ship in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, and
Yeah. And they go around asking people about the nuclear vessels.
and there's so many in jokes for the time. Spock nerve pinching people left and right. You have Spock swimming with the whales. You have McCoy getting upset about 20th century medicine, and being horrified and calling it the Dark Ages, and handing off random pills to old ladies to regrow their kidneys. I mean, you have Scotty talking to a mouse, a computer mouse. I mean, there's just so much lightheartedness and fun that makes up the movie that, not surprisingly, this is a very popular movie.
And it's very funny because usually environmental movies with environmental messages tend to get very preachy, but this one never really gets that preachy. Like it's mostly a fun adventure movie with some kind of a lesson.
Yeah, well, you said it perfectly. It's a movie where the original crew gets into some shenanigans and has to get themselves out again, and save the future in the process, which is what they always do.
Yeah, and it's not even worth talking about the plot, because mostly the emotional core of the movie comes from Spock slowly regaining back his memories and his emotional connection to the Enterprise crew, especially to Kirk, but also to the others. And it's just it has some heartfelt moments, and it's just a very feel good movie. And up until the new movies, not adjusted for inflation, this was the most successful movie.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, I think you get to see William Shatner in his element with his comedic acting, which is, as you know, over the top, and it's just the best thing to watch.
Yeah.
With his expressions and his
right.
Yeah. And you, of course, you saw a completely different Kirk in the other movies, because that was a dissatisfied Kirk. And then later, a Kirk who was grieving the loss of his friend, and here we have the old Kirk back.
Yeah, which is weird because his son just died, but okay.
Well,
move on.
yeah, no, you just move on from that whole point. for this movie. It's like they literally suspend time by doing time travel in order to just like take a moment out of the seriousness of what they left back home to just go save some whales. Save some whales, that's all it is.
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
So, yes, we shall move on because the next movie. Well, one thing I have to say is that, The Voyage Home, the fourth movie, was directed by Leonard Nimoy.
Yeah.
And, I guess William Shatner got a little bit jealous. And he was like, well, I want to direct a movie now.
And therefore he did.
So they left him. Yeah. And the result is the fifth movie, The Final Frontier.
And I think it's worth noting here that, as we even mentioned at the Wrath of Khan, they weren't sure that they were, even after the motion picture, right, they weren't sure they were going to be making another movie. At this point, they have been steadily churning out original series movies every 2 to 3 years. And now they're on the fifth one.
Yeah, and also I want to say that after The Voyage Home, The Voyage Home came in 1986, and it made basically Paramount greenlight a new Star Trek series, The Next Generation.
Yes.
Which started airing in 1987.
Yes.
So the Star Trek franchise was like rising from the dead, basically, at this point, with movies and the TV show. So another movie seems like a sure thing. And yeah, sure enough, William Shatner had to direct it.
And to your point, now that The Next Generation is already in the second season, we'll later see that some of that will influence not this movie, but the one that comes after. So that's a very good point. Yeah.
So, The Final Frontier.
Can I give you the tagline, Soda?
Was there even a plot? Yeah, please do. Please do.
So, The Final Frontier, the tagline is, what does God need with a starship? Which also happens to be a line in the movie.
Probably the most famous line, yes.
Yes.
Well, The Final Frontier had very cute opening scene and closing scene, which that's mostly what it had going for it. Of just Kirk, Spock, and McCoy hanging out camping on Earth. But afterwards, we get a very strange, convoluted story about Spock's brother, because apparently Spock has a brother, who comes out of nowhere and, kidnaps the Enterprise and goes searching for God.
Yes, that's it in a nutshell. They find God, and God is in fact not God.
And there are Klingons too.
Oh, yes, of course.
There are Klingons all the time.
Of course, because, again, what are you going to do when you see the Enterprise and you're a Klingon? You're going to follow it to have a battle with Kirk. I mean, natural. Naturally.
Yeah.
So, there's still a certain amount of humor in this movie. It's more of a philosophical movie. It's asking the bigger questions. This time it's like the motion picture, existence and faith and all that.
Yeah. It's just not the motion picture had a lot of flaws, but you get the feeling that there was a lot more thought put into the motion picture than into The Final Frontier.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah. The Final Frontier is just, it's bad. It's pretty bad, There is no opinion around the bush. It's not controversial, it's just bad. Special effects are kind of weird. The plot is very thin. What does God need with a starship? Okay. Kirk is basically an ego-stroking movie for Kirk because Shatner.
Again, Shatner's directing the movie. Yeah. Kirk gets all the best lines.
Of course, and he also saves the entire universe and fights God, and yeah. But yeah,
it's not a complicated movie in any sense. The plot is not at all complicated. It's I'd say the one thing it has going for it, outside of the triumvirate moments, is the character of Sybok, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on.
Yeah, I guess it's a fascinating kind of take, but even Sybok, like, his backstory makes no sense. His mother was a Vulcan princess.
It makes no sense.
The Vulcans have monarchies.
But he's sort of like a false villain of the movie. Because he's a villain who's not really a villain at all. He's just a zealot.
Yeah.
So he's got very strong personal beliefs, and he's just doing what he can to get to this sacred place. His version of Shangri-La. Shakari, I think they call it, something like that.
Yeah, it's something like that. Yeah.
But of course, he has to steal his brother's ship to get there. Yeah.
I think part of it is like that. By this point, it was what, 1989,
89. Yeah.
89. Yeah. The crew was getting old, and the story was not prepared for it. Like, you could see the actors are kind of too old for what they're supposed to be doing. Like, this is maybe a story that could have worked as like a very wacky episode of the series. But yeah, as a movie set, it's a movie in 1989 when the crew is very clearly in their past their 50s, basically.
Past their prime, as we say. Yes.
Yeah, it just didn't work at all.
I don't know what else there is to say about this movie. It's
just bad. Yeah, and it also didn't make a lot of money. So the question of having a sixth movie, there was actually some doubt if they'll have a sixth movie, but then people were like, well, the crew deserves like a proper send-off, not this movie.
Exactly. I think maybe fans were afraid that if this was the last movie of the original series crew, it was a stinker. What a terrible way to send them off into their, from their glory days into retirement. Yeah. So, we get a last movie, a sixth movie.
Oh, God. A last movie, yeah.
So, The Final Frontier, in no sense, kills the franchise. It just, yeah. Thank goodness we get Paramount investing once more, and so in 1991, there is the Undiscovered Country.
Yeah, also, it's worth saying that by this point, the movie, The Final Frontier, didn't make much, but The Next Generation was very popular, so maybe that's why they kind of made the effort. So we get the Undiscovered Country. And the Undiscovered Country does take like a bit of a story from The Next Generation, like you mentioned. It basically deals with finally a peace accord between the Federation and the Klingons, so they'll stop interfering with our movies. And in The Next Generation, there is already a peace accord, so the sixth movie is basically about how it came to be. And in this movie, basically a moon, one of the moons of in the Klingon Empire, that is responsible for producing a very important. I don't remember what you get from the moon. Some important mineral, something.
Yeah, isn't it? Is it Kronos?
I can't remember, but I don't think it's very important. Basically, the moon explodes, and the Klingon Empire doesn't have that resource anymore. so they couldn't maintain they couldn't basically maintain their empire unless they signed a peace accord with the Federation and accept their help, which is what they do. But then someone assassinates the Klingons. The Klingon ambassadors come to negotiate the peace agreement, and Kirk and Spock are in the neighborhood, and they beam up to the Klingon ship to help, but they can't manage to do it, and then they're judged for not doing enough, basically.
Yes, and then they're sent to prison.
They're sent to a penal colony.
Yes.
To a penal colony. Well, and the rest of the crew tries to clear their name and find out who actually killed the ambassador. This is really the proper send-off that the crew does, you know. And I think it's interesting that it is less of an action movie than the other movies, because, like I said, the Final Frontier didn't really concern itself with how the crew is very obviously past their prime, but this movie does kind of notice it. So it's a lot more about, you know, thoughts, you know, kind of a mystery and should be solved, and more space battles than, you know, outright action heroes.
And to be honest, it also shows some of the tenets of what the Federation is supposed to stand for, which is they're a body of different cultures, different races who help each other, learn from each other, and in that way grow their cultures. So really it's about extending the olive branch to your sworn enemy when they're in a time of need. So it's about the Federation doing what the Federation should do best, which is in a moment of diplomacy to come up with that peace accord and set aside differences to work together with you know, your former enemy. So basically, just from is it a Star Trek movie? Yes, because that's one of the tenets of what Star Trek is. And then, like you said, if you take away that piece of it, it's basically a mystery.
Yeah, it is a mystery, and I think I like this movie because, you know, it's very normal for those movies to focus about, you know, the relationship between Kirk and Spock, but this one actually feels more like an ensemble movie, I think, and also Kirk and McCoy get to spend some time together, which doesn't happen often in those movies. And yeah, and it's a good movie. It's well written, it's well acted, well directed. They brought back the director of The Wrath of Khan for this. Yeah, it was a really good send-off.
So since you mentioned directors, should we just spend a moment talking about the directors of the movies before we move on?
Yeah, I don't remember who directed the motion picture movie.
That was Robert Wise. Bob Wise. That's what they called him. He went by Bob.
I don't know much about him.
He was, at the time, he was a well-known director, so to speak. So what Paramount did was they took a director who was fairly well-known and well-received and put him in charge of a Star Trek movie.
Interesting. It's kind of the opposite of what big studios do today. Where they like to take very new directors that they kind of just get to tell them what to do, and the directors don't have enough clout to say no.
I mean, other than that, there's not a lot to say about him as the director of the motion picture. I think it really starts with Nicholas Meyer in The Wrath of Khan.
Nicholas Meyer directed The Wrath of Khan. He also directed, as I said, The Undiscovered Country, the 6th movie. Then Search for Spock and The Voyage were both directed by Leonard Nimoy, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so Leonard Nimoy directed 2 movies. Leonard Nimoy being, of course, the actor who plays Spock. And then, because he was jealous, I suppose, William Shatner, who plays Kirk, got to direct the fifth movie. I remember an interesting story I read once that after he directed after he made the fourth movie, The Voyage Home, Leonard Nimoy was invited to show it off in the USSR, back in the 80s when it was still around. And he wanted to go and show it there because he thought he had like a very important message to say about saving the planet. But also because he had family left behind in Ukraine, and he wanted to meet them. So he used this opportunity to go meet his family in Ukraine.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Was this Leonard Nimoy's directorial debut?
I think the Search of Spock was.
Okay, and then what about William Shatner?
Yeah, I think
The
that was a directorial
the Final Frontier, was it also his directorial debut?
Yeah.
I think I read somewhere that even though William Shatner was directing the Final Frontier, he still leaned on Leonard Nimoy quite a bit for input. And then later, when they did the Undiscovered Country, because both Leonard and William had directed the previous two movies, Nicholas Meyer, he was receptive of any input that Leonard and William had as well. Or Bill.
Yeah.
We should just say Bill
That's,
Shatner, since that's what
true.
he goes by.
Yeah. That's true. I also read that Leonard Nimoy supported Shatner when he directed a lot. I also know that Nicholas Meyer, when he directed, he said he had his technique to get Shatner to be less hammy as an actor was just to ask him to do a million takes of the same scene until he got tired and didn't want to overact again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes that's necessary, right? They should have just reminded Bill that he got to do all the, theater acting he wanted in the Voyage Home.
Yeah.
So the other thing I read was that from the Search for Spock in the Voyage Home and the Final Frontier all the way to the Undiscovered Country is sort of a, like, how do I put it? The culmination of Spock's emotional journey. There was little restraint on how Leonard Nimoy wanted to portray Spock in those movies. They sort of let him have free reign, and I think trusted his instincts since, obviously he had invested a lot in creating the character since the original series show, in how Spock went through that journey from the search for Spock. Well, so you get a little bit of that at the end of that, but mostly it starts in the Voyage Home and then the Voyage Home through the Undiscovered Country.
Yeah, that's true. You can really see Spock's kind of.
It's evolution, right? So it's an interesting topic because he's reborn in a sense, and he is him. He is the Spock they remember, but he's a lot more laid back as they go through the movies and up to the Undiscovered Country.
It's funny because in the original series you kind of get the sense of Spock also going through a journey, being very rigid and extremely vocal in the first few episodes, and slowly becoming less so over the course of the series. And the motion picture kind of restarts him because we meet him immediately after he tries to purge all of his emotions again. And he kind of has to go through the entire thing again.
I don't feel like in the Wrath of Khan that I had he just felt like good old Spock to me. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, the motion picture was everybody, like once they were over the divorce
Yeah.
or the breakup, and then they were all back together in the Wrath of Khan, but then obviously the Wrath of Khan is very, literally that is the end of Spock as we knew him, the original Spock. And then he's reborn.
Yeah, exactly. but I still feel like, I don't know, the motion picture did kind of like restart things for Spock.
Yeah. It did. No, it absolutely
maybe it was
did.
kind
Yeah.
of necessary. I think maybe it was kind of necessary because the original series has been off the air for 10 years at this point. So, people maybe didn't knew who Spock was. So it was kind of an interesting introduction. But yeah, but then we got again, Spock died and then was reborn again. So it's basically his emotional journey restarted 3 times.
To be honest, I really feel like Spock as a character has had one of the best character arcs in all of Hollywood.
Yeah, it's true. He was a very inspirational kind of character.
Yeah, he's very
I'm not
inspirational.
surprised they want. Yeah, I'm not surprised they wanted to tell this story again and again. It's a good story.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the fact that the directors allowed Leonard Nimoy to sort of take the reins of Spock's characterization, I think that's what made at least Spock consistent throughout the movies in his characterization.
That's true.
Like, we already talked about how Kirk was not very consistent in his characterization, and then in some of the other movies, even the characterization of like in the Final Frontier, I had some issues with the characterization of just like Uhura and Chekhov and Sulu.
Yeah, a lot of people did.
Yeah, so and different director, Bill, obviously, but depending on whose vision it is, and it even like with Nicholas Meyer, right? He's not necessarily was not necessarily a Star Trek fan when he started the movies.
Yeah.
So for someone from that perspective, maybe trying to direct the movies in such a way that the characters fit into the plot, and not the plot is centered around these characters that we already know and love. So there can be a big difference in like characterization and how they're written in the script, and how we know them from the original series TV show. So, but of all of that, again, because Leonard Nimoy portraying Spock, and he had that freedom, it was remarkably consistent.
Also, I want to say that, like, in the more of a meta fact, but from what I understand, that the main cast, when they worked on the original series, they didn't really become close. They were like core colleagues, and after the series ended, they kind of separated, went in their own ways, And like I said, from what I've heard, from what I've read and seen in interviews, working on the motion picture was not a good experience for any of them. No one spoke of it, favorably.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why they all kind of wanted the Wrath of Khan to be the last movie when they went into it. But then over the time, apparently filming the Wrath of Khan is what made them bond as friends. Basically became friends, and the more movies they did afterwards, the closer they became. So it was kind of nice to see that.
Yeah.
You heard that, they actually did become friends in real life.
Yes.
Afterwards.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
A nice antecedent to that is when DeForest Kelley, as you know, who passed away from stomach cancer in the 90s, one of his last remarks was, his only regret, we could have just done one more Star Trek movie.
Yeah.
And that to me spoke volumes of just the closeness that he felt with the cast.
Yeah. And how much they enjoyed making those movies.
Yeah, enjoyed making those movies, and it sounds like those were good experiences for him. So.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we need to move on. So let's talk about the motion picture novelization real quick, because that's an interesting one.
Oh, that is an interesting one. The motion picture was the only movie that Gene Roddenberry was seriously involved in, and he also wrote the novelization of the movie, which is the only novelization he wrote, and it had a lot of interesting tidbits in it.
Oh goodness!
For one thing. Yeah,
I know where you're
yeah.
going, so keep going.
Yeah. One thing you gave us the word Tehila, which is the Vulcan word that refers to someone who is close to you, like a brother, a friend, or a lover. And it's a word that Spock uses to refer to Kirk. You can kind of guess where most fans went with it. He also kind of gave us the bit about, Spock not being able to complete his Kolimar and purge all of his emotions because he can't stop thinking about Kirk. Yeah, a lot of fans really found that interesting.
Well, I think Roddenberry at that time was probably aware of the slash fic trend.
Yeah, I like, hear about fandoms from back in the day, the 80s, the 70s. There are other fandoms, but for the most part, some creators, tolerated the entire, fanzines and fan fiction around their characters, but a lot of them didn't like the slash fix part of it. Didn't like the slash shippers very much. Um, we mentioned the Star Wars movie before, and the Star Wars, the people responsible for Star Wars really didn't like the slash fiction
Yeah.
around Star Wars, and really came down very hard on them. But Star Trek was always kind of nice to its fans in that regard.
Yeah.
Roddenberry never came out and said, yeah, they're in love, but it was like, well, if you want to think about them that way, you do you. Whatever you want.
Can I talk for a moment about Roddenberry and his, as we know, how much he appreciates the female form?
Yeah.
So this clearly, I mean, you could tell he wrote this book because there's some observations throughout the novelization that are, let's just say, Roddenberry-esque.
Yeah.
For instance, when you have that scene where it's Elia, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Elia is in the shower, and they find her in the shower. Uh, just the way he describes her is almost unbearably lovely in her nudity.
Mm-hmm.
Talks about her impossibly lovely, hard-tipped breasts, and says things like, how Kirk can't keep but like bringing his attention back to her naked body. What?
Yeah.
And it's a little uncomfortable. And then I think probably one of the lines that was the most uncomfortable for me was when Kirk is reminiscing about one of his former lovers. It says he could feel the slight pressure of his genitals responding to those memories. What? I'm sorry, but I really don't want to be in Kirk's brain when he is aroused.
Yeah. Too much information, dude. Too much information. Um, Roddenberry was famously, a dirty old man.
Yeah.
No, Ilia's entire species, the Deltans, he originally wrote them as very sexual people.
Yeah.
They were in the movie when she came aboard, she was like, "Yeah, I took my vow of celibacy," and I was like, "What? Why would you take a vow of celibacy?" And apparently, in the novels, her species, the Deltans, communicate a lot through sexual gestures, sexual acts, I guess.
Yeah.
They use them a lot to express affection, and yeah, Roddenberry is a dirty old man. He was for most of his life, apparently. Yeah. So, yeah.
So the one other thing that stood out to me for the novelization is so in most of the official materials about the motion picture, V'ger is spelled V''Ger, and I think if you see that, even if you know what V'ger is, then you have a pretty good idea. It's Voyager, just abbreviated.
Yeah.
And so to prevent the reader from sort of guessing this right off the bat before the reveal of who V'ger is, he spelled it Vejur. Exactly as it sounds. So he spelled it phonetically to avoid
Interesting.
to avoid people spoiling themselves by reading the book.
Yeah.
Interesting. And Roddenberry never wrote another novel after that.
Maybe it's for the best.
I agree.
The novel, from what I understand, the novel also had some interesting tidbits about Kirk's life after the show. Apparently, he was married for a couple of years there. His wife, well, in the motion picture, there was the scene of like two officers who are trying to beam aboard, but because of transporter malfunction, they die in kind of a very horrific way. And apparently the female one, the woman who was trying to beam aboard, was Kirk's ex-wife.
What is fascinating about that is because the book is written by Gene Roddenberry, technically it is canon. Like the most canon of canon. As he is the creator of the series.
Yeah.
So sometimes it makes me wonder if he was just making things up. Like, oh yeah, this is what I would have done if, I'd had all the creative power in the series, and without realizing that he was literally putting into canon these tidbits that just seem weird.
Yeah, I think, like you said, he was working on the Star Trek Phase 2 for quite a while there, and I think he just put as many ideas as he had about that into this novel. He wanted, Ilya and the Deltons to be like a big part of the Phase 2, and I think he kind of wanted them to maybe like be a breakout character, so that maybe he could write more stories about them. But it didn't work out because no one really remembers Ilya and Detmer. What's his name?
Yeah.
Decker, not Detmer. Decker.
Anything else to mention here before we talk about the fan reaction to the motion picture?
Nothing I can think about.
Well, I think we have already sort of alluded to the reactions of the fans for the motion picture. As you said, many fans were disappointed with the motion picture. Yeah. In fact, some of them were
very slow. Very
sort of gave them some derisive names for the movie, like the motionless picture, the slow motion picture, or the motion sickness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they'll say, if you ever ask a fan, like even I, like if you ask me about this movie, I'm going to say, well, it's supposed to be a regular movie length, but it feels like it's 3 times as long because of that one scene.
Yeah.
And just the pacing.
It's not just one scene. No, it's just one scene. They just take forever with those shots. The shots that they go into work, and every time they had to use a special effect, they just lingered on it because they spent so much money and time making it, so they had to show it somehow. So just linger on everything.
I actually read someone who compared it to the long shot of the Enterprise in Space Dock was just like the opening scene to Spaceballs movie. I don't know if you've ever seen the Spaceballs movie, but it is a parody. Like a parody of Star Wars.
I don't think I've ever seen it. I know of it.
So that's not a compliment. I think in general, like you would say, if you talked about like the least memorable movie, it's probably the motion picture. I think is the general reaction.
I mean, maybe, but I think it has some sort of memorability by just looking and feeling very differently from all the other movies. I think the Next Generation made the most forgettable movie of all the franchise. Not Generations, actually, but one of the other movies is very forgettable. The motion picture at least tried to like have like a very unique tone and feel to it. Like I said, it doesn't look or feel like any other movie or TV show or episode in the series, in any series of Star Trek.
Yeah. It's also, but it's a little harsh on characterization, though. I mean, think about it. Kirk basically spends like 45 minutes of the movie blackmailing his way into the captain's chair.
Yeah, he does.
It's off putting in a sense, if you think about it.
It is. Like I said, I really think Roddenberry was trying to get rid of those characters and really, really hoping that he would like his new characters, but he just didn't work out that way.
In comparison, what was the fan reaction to The Wrath of Khan?
Well, there was a lot of people were really upset about Spock dying. I mean, again, they didn't know there was going to be a third movie, and you know, just having Spock die so soon after you got him back, and he was the most popular character on the show.
Um,
A lot of people were very upset.
yeah. And then, what was the reaction, do you think, when they realized there was going to be a third movie?
I mean, if they, I guess they kind of knew as soon as they knew the title, they kind of realized, oh, Spock is coming back. I guess they were happy. I don't know. I guess they were probably, if I know my fandoms, and I think I know fandoms by now, they're probably kind of starting to theorize how Spock will get back.
I can also imagine how many, like, fix there were in the interim.
Yeah, yeah, but it was the 80s and there was no internet. So.
Well, no, but that doesn't mean you can't be,
Yeah.
a sad, lonely fan who's traumatized by Spock's death sitting in your house with a pen and paper rewriting the ending of the movie.
Yeah. And like we said, I don't think there was any strong reaction after the search for Spock because a fourth movie was kind of guaranteed. But maybe that's why the search for Spock is kind of remembered as the man movie, the math movie, and I think maybe that's the reason why, because there was no a lot of speculation or anything like it afterwards.
This maybe seems like a bit of a digression, but the uniforms across these movies, I think the fans were probably at least a little more appreciative of the uniforms in The Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock than they were in the motion picture. I'm not sure what they were wearing in the motion picture. Full body suits?
Yeah. Onesie pajamas. 70s pajamas.
But isn't it in The Wrath of Khan they get the maroon uniforms?
Yeah, they do. And I also didn't like the uniforms in the Final Frontier, the beige ones. They're all really boring.
Washed out.
Yeah. Yeah, but the maroon uniforms are very nice looking. Very military looking, though.
I think I know the most about fan reactions to the Voyage Home, because I think you and I probably felt the same way that the fans did. We just found it a very pleasurable, enjoyable movie. It was good to see Spock back and see the crew ribbing him good-naturedly and watch him, resume those close relationships with people who literally brought him back from death. From the brink of death. I think the general lingering nostalgia for the Voyage home is just because it was such a fun movie. There was nothing abstract about it. It was always, the pacing was good. The jokes were hilarious. The level of camp was reminiscent of the original series TV show. I know The Wrath of Khan is very popular as like one of the most rewatched original series movies, but I think The Voyage Home is also like second to that and the most rewatched. At least what I've heard.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's not as famous among people who are not big fans of Star Trek, but among fans of Star Trek, it's very, very popular.
Mm-hmm. I mean, well, it's the most reminiscent of like a Star Trek episode, right?
Yeah, that's true.
At least in the storytelling of
But in
it.
a good way. In a good way. In a good way.
Yeah, in a great way. One of the better, like one of the fun, like you said, one of the fun campy episodes of the original series. That's what The Voyage Home is like, and I think fans appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, the movie also introduced a lot of new characters. Some became more popular than others, obviously. I'm kind of sad we didn't get to see Carol Mark in The Voyage Home, yeah, or even in the Search for Spock, because her son died. It's weird that we didn't get to see a reaction.
Right. Well, we barely get to see Kirk's reaction.
Yeah, but at least it was dead.
But see, that's what I think. We barely get to see Kirk's reaction, and he did not raise David. Carol, that's her son that she raised. She worked closely with. They shared a passion project. I'm like you. I wish I had seen the aftermath.
And she also spent most of her life, afraid that David is going to get him killed because he will go in his father's footsteps. And, came true. Her fear came true.
Yeah, it's very true. Her fears are realized. He does something reckless,
and we didn't get to see her reaction.
Yeah, we never get to see her reaction. Yep, it's a disappointment. On the other hand, how do you feel about Carol Marcus's just another extension of showing how Kirk is married to the job? Because we saw quite a lot in the original series TV show that he had past relationships, and at the end of the day, his ambition came first.
Yeah, but in this case, I think it was both of their ambitions. Neither of them really wanted to settle down family. They both had different ideas about how they want to live their lives and raise children if they have any. It wasn't like a bad. You don't get the sense they had a really bad breakup or anything. Just it was just the circumstances. They made their decision and they were very adult about it.
Right, and they split ways. It's just I remember when I first watched this and we met Carol Marcus, right? And I thought, oh, she's just another one of Kirk's. She's just another one of Kirk's relationships that didn't make it.
Yeah. Well, she was, but she was also,
But then I just started to think, well, that makes sense because they were young and in the academy. They had their own career paths to pursue. Their careers were more important to them than the relationship. What I didn't understand was if she was pregnant, why she never told him.
No, I think she did tell him. I'm pretty sure she did tell him. He knew he had a son. He also knew why, he knew why he wasn't part of his life either. He chose not to be part of his life.
I'm sorry. What I meant was I didn't think she told him right away. I didn't think it was a joint.
Um,
I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I didn't realize. I didn't think it was a joint decision that she would keep the child and raise the child, and he would be part of the child's life. I thought it was more like she made the call and then just informed him of the fact. But he never contested it because he
well,
was, content where he was.
I don't notice the difference. I mean, she felt pregnant. She became pregnant. She became pregnant basically. And she decided to keep the child, and she didn't want him to be part of the child's life, and he agreed. And that's the thing. There was nothing to contest.
Okay. Maybe I need to rewatch that
I
again.
don't know. That's the thing I got from the. I don't know. That's the thing I remember getting from the movie. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know. They seem to be in a good relationship. No. They don't seem like he wasn't angry. Like, why didn't you tell me? No.
No. I know he
There
was
just
never angry about it, but I always had the sense that he felt some regret later on for the choice that he made to stay out of
I
David's
also got this
life.
feeling, but I
Yeah.
also got this feeling I think he regretted it. Basically, what we saw in the Wrath of Khan was very old Kirk, full of regrets.
Yes.
That was his entire character. All of his regrets coming back to haunt him.
Mhm. So what about David Marcus as a character? I Do you feel that he was more like Kirk than he was like Carol? Do you think they were trying to push his characterization in that direction in order to set up his death, or?
Well, we didn't really get to know Carol that well. So I don't know if he was a lot more like Kirk than Carol. Both Kirk and Carol seemed like, headstrong people.
Mhm.
Um, and ambitious and very married to the job. And he was all of those things, but who knows where he got them from?
Mhm.
Um, I do think that in the search for Spock, they definitely tried to kind of make a point that he had some Kirk tendencies, which is what got him killed eventually.
What do you think was his real purpose in existing? Besides the drama.
Mostly the drama. In the Wrath of Khan, he was one of those, one of Kirk's many regrets in life. And in the search for Spock, it was basically, the price. You can't just save Spock and not pay anything. You can just bring another one person from the dead and, get away scot-free.
If you think about it, that is a theme from the original series. It actually takes me back to this side of paradise. Kirk doesn't get to have his cake and eat it too. There's always like
Yeah.
something that has to give when he really wants something bad enough. So if he wants to return to his ship, he has to like with Edith Keeler, right, back in The City on the Edge of Forever. The future comes before her life. The future that
Yeah.
he knows. And then in this side of paradise, he, had his wife not died, been stoned to death, he probably still would have left her behind to return to his ship.
Are you talking about the Paradise Kingdom? Or he said before Paradise is where they all got like high on those space flowers. Yeah.
It just always seems to be a struggle for Kirk. He gains one
Mm.
thing and loses another. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All the
That's
time.
very true. Um. Yeah.
But that, I guess, is the burden of a hero.
I think the show kind of makes the point that that's just how life works. You can't just have everything go perfectly all the time. You have to work hard for it. You have to make difficult choices. That's just how life is.
Yeah. Um, I think the only other thing to mention here about David Marcus is perhaps his fondness for Saavik.
Yeah, he had kind of chemistry there.
Yeah.
but
And
it never went anywhere for obvious reasons.
yeah. Would you say that's another Kirk tendency, or was he just a, young man who saw an interesting partner? I don't know. You're right. Chemistry is a good way to describe it. But they made a point of pairing up Saavik with David Marcus in The Search for Spock.
Yeah. I don't know if it was the Kirk tendency. He wasn't like right on flirting with her or anything, but they just seem, they seem to share some interests, and they had, I guess, they had a lot in common.
They had good chemistry together, but was that indicative of his need to take the shot for her? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I
Take
don't
the
think
bullet
that
for her.
was the point.
Yeah.
I don't think that was the point. I think the point was, that was his Kirk tendency to just sacrifice himself.
Yeah. And that's where I landed. I'm like, well, you know what? I think that's where it comes in. Carol's fear that he was too much like his father, because he's, always out challenging challenging the galaxy, and the galaxy challenges him right back. And but does he have his father's knack for getting out of the no-win scenario? Does that recklessness just translate into present a danger to his life? And it does, because he dies. So it's a shame.
Yeah.
We should talk about Saavik.
Yeah.
Just start. I would say just maybe talk about the first version of Saavik, because she was played by two different actresses.
Yeah. The first version of Saavik that we meet in The Wrath of Khan was played by STII.
Yes.
I think. Yeah. Um, she was kind of interesting, she was kind of a breakout character. A lot of people liked her. She was, as you said, Spock's protege. She was kind of similar to him in her disposition. She was also, very headstrong and sure of herself, and she was a Vulcan, basically. Well, in the novel, they never said she was actually half Romulan, but in the movie they never said it, so we can just treat her as a Vulcan, I think.
I have to say, I really liked the way Spock's relationship with his protege was presented in both movies.
Yeah.
I felt like she truly was, like, he really was like mentor to her, which is why I personally found it uncomfortable when you had that scene in Search for Spock where she assisted teenager Spock through his pon farr.
Yeah.
Even though, I think rationally, if you approach that situation, I mean, it makes sense, but as the viewer, knowing the kind of history that they had, and probably how she felt about him in a platonic way, it just seemed unfortunate.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I also thought, the actress in the second movie, I forget her name in The Search for Spock. I really forget her name. Um, she she was less assertive than Christy Alley. She was less, less assured of herself, like I said.
Robin Curtis.
Robin Curtis. I'm sure she's a great actress and all, but she didn't feel like the same character.
No. She was more
No.
contained.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Saavik became like this like I said, breakout character. I think there are maybe still out there some fans of her and Spock. I think she and Spock like got married in the novels or something. And there was even a plan to have her hint that she's pregnant with Spock's child in the fourth movie. But in the Voyage home, she was supposed to appear, and there were supposed to be hints that she's pregnant with Spock's baby because of the Ponfar scene.
Hmm.
And at the last minute, Leonard Nimoy decided not to put it in because, well, it's weird.
That's exactly right. It's weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was kind of popular as a character.
She is the only character that was
Popular with the fans.
yeah. Yeah.
I wouldn't say the only one because I think Sybok is also kind of popular for different reasons though. In a lot of fiction that kind of explores Spock's background, he does appear too.
Yes, that's true. It's actually a good segue into just talking about him. The brother nobody ever knew you had.
Yeah.
So I think I called him a zealot. I think that's a good description.
Yeah.
He was certain of his beliefs and his own personal philosophy that he decided to eschew the Vulcan way and was, I would say, disinherited in a way from Spock's family. Sort of estranged is the better word. He was estranged from Spock's family. So for reasons Spock never mentioned him. But that's what happens, with all these siblings. You never mention Spock. They show back up at some point.
Yeah.
And the actor who played Sybok, I think, did a really good job of just making him an entertaining character. Because like I said, he's not necessarily a villain of the movie, even though he is the link to the villain. He's Vulcan in a way. He's like he prefers, he likes the path of least resistance, but he does it in a more of a pacifist way. But he's not, as you saw, he takes hostages, right? He's not against, he's not a complete pacifist, even though he doesn't necessarily approve of violence and murder. So he's odd. I can see why he would be that sibling that you would never want to. He's that crazy family member you never tell people about.
Crazy family member who joined the cult. Yeah.
So if you think of him that way, then it sort of makes sense why Spock never mentioned that he had a brother. Half brother.
Yeah, true.
The only thing I don't agree with is Sybok is his method of persuading his followers or persuading people to become his followers, because he does use the Vulcan telepathic ability to influence people into freeing their selves, freeing their minds of their inner pain so that they believe in his cause and help him achieve the ends or help him achieve his ultimate goal, which is to find Shakari and God, essentially. So in that way, he's very manipulative. So he doesn't necessarily hold a knife to your throat, but I think there's a line there that gets crossed when you introduce invading someone's private mind in order to force them to face their pain so that you can turn them to your cause. What? I don't know. I disagreed with that. And then I was like, well, now Spock, I totally get why you never mentioned him, because he's crazy. And he's also has far less compunction about using his abilities in a manner that Vulcans would definitely not approve of.
That's true. What was I going to say? I think he was designed to be kind of a shady guy. You don't really trust him from the moment you meet him,
Yeah. I mean, he is the leader of a cult.
Yeah. Yeah.
But at the same time, he was supposed to, I think, come off as charismatic. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
you know, I'm sure Kirk met him, was like, whoa, this is your brother? This guy, like, loves to talk and, like he's way more outgoing than you ever are, Spock. I'm sure everybody was like, I see no family resemblance. Who is this again? Your long lost brother?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are your feelings about Sybok? Just as a character in general.
I think that, like, like most things in the movie, he's kind of inconsistent. Like, I mean, at the end of it, he wasn't so bad. Like you said, he wasn't even the main villain, and he was like mostly driven by his belief and faith, and he didn't really want to hurt anybody. But he obviously didn't also care very much if he hurt people on the way to realizing his goal.
No, I mean, he put an entire ship of people in danger just to get across the Great Barrier, which, as we know, is very dangerous, and you know the likelihood of dying in the process is extremely high. And he's like, "Nope, we're gonna do it." Yeah. So what if you're not one of my followers, Kirk? It doesn't matter. We're gonna do it anyway. And I'm just like, what? Okay.
Yeah. So he's not a very likable guy.
At the same time, he had personality. But I can see why he never showed back up as a mention in anything else. So, do you feel like he was repentant at all at the end of the movie?
Maybe. It's kind of hard to say. He was disappointed that, he didn't meet God, basically.
But do you feel like he had a moment where he realizes, he had been manipulated? His personal beliefs allowed him to be manipulated by this entity that had very impure intentions and was actually, on the verge of destroying them all. So
I don't think he regretted it. I don't think he regretted it because he hurt people. He just kind of regretted it because it wasn't true.
Yeah. Which is very selfish, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I got to say about that guy.
Yeah.
How dare you cause more mind trauma to McCoy? How dare you? I think you can definitely tell, like Bill Shatner had a serious investment in the movie. I mean, if you didn't know he was the director, you might actually guess he was the director because Kirk was, definitely the main hero of the movie. I mean, even when Sybok is, forcing McCoy and then Spock to face their inner pain, Kirk's like, nope, no thanks. He's the one who, as always, he's the one who resists the temptation, resists the bad guy, resists the influence in order to figure a way out of this situation and, save the day. So I don't think Sybok had a chance. Shatner was directing the movie.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Valeris.
Valeris. Well, like you said before, in the sixth movie they wanted to bring Saavik back, but it didn't work out for some. I think Leonard Nimoy was kind of against it because of what happens with Valeris in this movie. She turns out to be a traitor, of course.
Yes.
So he didn't want Saavik's character to be a traitor. So they bring this girl, Valeris, who's also Spock's protege, who's also Vulcan. There isn't really much to say about her besides the fact that, well, she is kind of Saavik's clone for the most part, but she turns out to be a bad guy.
So I heard that Nicholas Meyer, when he was, promoting the Undiscovered Country before it was actually opened in the theaters, that he sort of hinted that Spock might have a small, like, romance in the movie. I think people, assumed Saavik was going to be in the movie, and maybe that he said that because Saavik was intended to be in the movie, and then they changed it last minute to Valeris. But I have to say, I think that caused a lot of confusion because I don't feel like they changed the script enough to remove whatever that potential small romance was supposed to be. Because there's this one scene in the beginning where, Valeris comes into Spock's quarters, and it just felt off to me. It had this, it's almost like had this mood lighting. And the way that Spock talked to her and like was like handing off his legacy or whatever, it kind of smacked a little bit of old man hitting on his young female protege. It creeped me out a little bit. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. It is. I get what you mean.
So I feel like that was a misstep in the beginning, and I think it was probably due to the fact that they changed the character and what was originally intended.
Yeah, you're probably right. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. I don't know why they tried to push the romance between Saavik and Spock so much.
But it definitely shouldn't have been there with Valeris. It was very awkward.
Yeah. I also think it shouldn't have been there in Saavik, but
Yeah.
I did kind of like the twist at the end when she turned out to be a bad person. Well,
Yeah, that was a good twist.
And I like Spock's reaction too, because we don't often get to see lose control like that. He was very angry about her, about the way she betrayed him, and he basically
So you don't
messaged.
feel like him forcibly extracting information from her was a violation of his principles?
I think, if I remember correctly, he did it to save a lot of people. So I think it was kind of an the end justifies the means kind of thing. Or the good of the many is more important than the good of the few.
So you don't feel like he was angry enough that.
He might have been angry enough to like maybe use excessive force.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very possible, but at the end of the day, he needed to save people. I think.
Yeah. I think some of the fan reaction to that, there was a little bit of negative reaction to that because I think those who really feel strongly about Spock's characterization felt that he wouldn't have like forcibly taken that from her in that way. But
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a debate over that. I found that part uncomfortable as well, but at the same time, rationally, it makes sense. Like you said, there was a need for him to do that. Needs of the many outweigh the needs of the one or the few.
Yeah.
So
Well, basically, those are the main characters. The new main characters that popped up in the movies.
I think in the novel, like in the Star Trek novels, probably like you said, Saavik is about the only character who is like prominently in some of the novels. I don't
Yeah.
think I've ever seen Valeris or Sybok or Kirk's like Kirk with Carol.
Yeah.
I personally think Saavik was the most well liked of the new characters.
Yeah. She definitely was. I mean, the fact that she was also introduced in like the favorite movie kind of helped.
Yeah. So that being said, I think we should just talk about. Well, we've already kind of talked about what the worst movie is. um,
So here's the question: do you think that the Final Frontier is worse than the motion picture?
that's where I was going.
Yeah.
I think they both are not good movies, but they're in different ways. So
Yeah.
I think story wise, the Final Frontier was messy and like kind of and not well executed. At the same time, I really liked the visualization in The Final Frontier, whereas I hated the visualizations in the motion picture just because they used them. they made too much use of them. But I guess the plot was okay of the motion picture. I mean, but then if you talk about characterization, like the characterization for me was off on the motion picture. I mean, again, probably because of the breakup. But in The Final Frontier, I felt they were more true to the characters for Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. But then they really messed up on the characterization of Sulu and Chekhov and Uhura. I don't know about Scotty. He was kind of not there, except for the one, like, brig breakout or whatever. So they both had their pain points. For me personally, I dislike the motion picture more than The Final Frontier because I found the motion picture, like, overall more, I found it more boring. And therefore, for me, it's the worst. What about you? Are you opposite?
I am kind of opposite
Yeah.
because the Final Frontier had like a couple of good scenes, like maybe the first scene, the last scene, and the McCoy memory scene. And maybe the not in front of the Klingons, but I don't know if it was a good scene or just a very funny scene.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate the motion picture try to be like different and have its
Yeah.
own unique style. And yeah, I talked about it a lot, but yeah, I kind of appreciate it for it because it is very, very different. And I like that they tried something new.
I like the score of The Final Frontier better than I like the motion picture, too. For me, like, music is a big part of the mood of the movie. I really felt that the score delivered on The Final Frontier for me. So, but I think if we had to pick the two worst movies, we agree it's the motion picture and The Final Frontier in whatever order.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that being said, on the other end of the spectrum, what do you think is the best movie of the six?
Um, I can't lie. My favorite movie is the sixth one. And yeah, the Undiscovered Country. I really enjoyed it. Um, I think it had some of the best character interactions. I enjoyed the story the most. Um, like I said, I think the Voyage was very, very fun, but I kind of like, a little bit higher stakes. I mean, yeah, the story of the Voyage was funny and all, but I kind of like the seriousness of the Undiscovered Country and like the hope, the Federation signing the peace accord with the Klingons.
There's a part in the Undiscovered Country where the Klingons talk about, you've never heard Shakespeare until you've heard it in Klingon.
Yeah, in the original Klingon, yeah.
In the original Klingon. And
Yeah.
did you know that Meyer said that he included that in the movie as sort of a reference to when Nazi Germany attempted to claim William Shakespeare as German?
I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Well,
Before World War II. And so that was
yeah.
like a subtle, he said that was like a subtle reference to that.
All right. I really got more of the USSR and the USA stopping the hostilities kind of vibe than Nazi Germany stopping the hostilities kind of vibe.
And then there was another movie, and because in some Russian movie they had already used that idea by saying something like Shakespeare was more moving in like the original Russian.
Yeah.
So it wasn't original because it had already been done, but Nicholas Meyer was just like, why not?
Why not?
Okay, so for you, The Undiscovered Country. I think The
Yeah.
Undiscovered Country is a really, really good movie. Like you, I appreciate the fact that it's a Star Trek movie from a premise perspective. You know, it's not just like an episodic adventure where they go back to save some whales.
Yeah.
But it actually has a moral lesson, and it's based off the real tenet of Star Trek, which is unity and helping your neighbors. So, um, the one thing that I didn't like in the Undiscovered Country was how Kirk's characterization with the Klingons. And I know this is sort of like a topic of debate for some people because here the Klingons are asking for help and they're trying to put together this peace accord, and you know Kirk's son was murdered by a Klingon, and Kirk says he has no liking for the Klingons when they mention that they don't like him. And so there's really hard feelings there, and I think that was overplayed. I didn't want Kirk to ever come off as like a racist or a bigot. And, you know, they made such point of that, especially in the original series TV show, of avoiding that with his character that I didn't appreciate seeing it in The Undiscovered Country. So that was really the only part of it that left me with sort of a sour taste in my mouth. But everything else about The Undiscovered Country was pretty awesome.
Um, I kind of like this part about Kirk because I think it kind of made sense. You know, he fought Klingons for most of his life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it would have been kind of, actually, I think it would have been kind of weird if he was just on board. Like, yeah, let's just sign peace accord with them right now. He fought them like he didn't just fight them from afar. He fought them face to face. They killed his son, like you said. Um, but I'm also kind of, you know, I like that he's like, he privately is like, he doesn't like Klingons, but, you know, he's not going to just, you know, go against the peace treaty.
Right. Yeah. No, that would be totally unlike him. In fact, that's
Yeah.
like the premise of one of the Kelvin universe movies. I think I mentioned that before. Beyond, you have someone who fought in the Romulan Wars and had hard, like you said, really personally did not like the Romulans and the other races that in the end the villain came off as like pro humanity
Yeah.
and against everyone else, and really xenophobic and racist, and then he turned into a terrorist. But thank God they didn't go that far with Kirk, because I would have hate to have seen him like sabotage something like a peace treaty over personal feelings.
Yeah. So, what is your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is The Voyage Home. And simply, there's not a lot of thought behind that, Soda. It's my favorite movie for the entertainment value.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I like in the version of what I like is that every character gets something to do. Like no
Yes,
character
it's an
else.
ensemble movie, and that's probably my favorite thing about it. You have all the crew paired off together. They each have separate tasks, but you get to see more of their interactions outside of either Kirk or Spock being with them. And I miss that a lot in some of the other movies. So
Yeah,
for me, that really set it apart from everything else, because at the end of the day, I think what I appreciated most about Star Trek original series show was the feeling of family and the ensemble, and we save the day because we all work together,
yeah,
not just Kirk saves the day. So from that perspective, that's why The Voyage Home is my favorite. It's they all had to work together to get back to the future with the whales.
yeah.
And so if this movie's playing on TV, you can bet I'm going to stop what I'm doing to watch it.
I mean, I would too. It's a good movie.
It has that campiness that makes me nostalgic for Star Trek. So
Yeah, that's true. It has like the good kind of campiness.
yes, the
Yeah.
good kind. How would you rank the ones in between then? Because I think we didn't talk about The Wrath of Khan, Search for Spock.
Hmm. Well,
Like, which do you like one better over the other?
well, yeah, The Voyage Home is probably my second favorite. So
Right. So I
um,
think we're aligned on.
yeah,
We're aligned
I think
on some of those best and worst.
yeah, I think I like the Search for Spock a little more than The Wrath of Khan because it depends on my mood, but mostly because I don't really like characterization in The Wrath of Khan. I feel like it had a part in creating this mythos of Kirk as like this brash, um, kind of arrogant captain when he wasn't like that at all, and I don't like it.
100% on board. I like Search for Spock better than The Wrath of Khan. Like you said, characterization of Kirk is just doesn't feel good at some
Yeah,
points. I still feel like um, he's that guy from the motion picture who just wants to be in the captain's seat, but isn't quite there yet, and he's just really dissatisfied.
yeah,
And then I think like it makes him reckless, and even though he does what he does best, and outsmarts Khan at several times, at the end of the day, they ended up in a situation where Spock had to die. No thanks.
yeah.
And the other thing is, I don't think the Wrath of Khan made good use of everybody else.
That's
I
also
think it
true.
was really just a Khan versus Kirk movie, and collateral damage was extensive. So yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
I agree.
yeah. Search for Spock.
It's a cute movie. It's a very
Yeah,
cute movie. It's about their friendship. It
yeah.
has a very touching ending. It's a cute movie.
It is. I mean, come on. McCoy trying to do a nerve pinch, and then Kirk rescuing him before he gets shipped off to the funny farm. Yeah.
Yeah. Then
And then like Sulu and Uhura trying to steal a ship. I mean, come on.
yeah, yeah,
I'd say I really like the show of support from Sarek. So even though not in the beginning of the movie, but later on, I liked all the extra like mythos and cultural additions to just Vulcans in general. To be honest, I'm not sure how I felt about the whole Genesis arc, though, even though it spans several movies. I mean, as a concept, it was a worthy one.
yeah.
The ability to recreate life.
Yeah. It's an it's an interesting concept, but yeah, I get what you mean. Um,
Well, that's pretty interesting. So, really, the way we rank these six movies are very similar, except our best and worst spots. But
yeah,
I don't think they're that. I think we're pretty much aligned on that. It's good.
yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time.